Alright guys, so I'm going to be doing a brief review of chiaroscuro for y'all just so that when I talk about that term in a future video, y'all understand what I'm talking about. So it's an Italian word that's basically talking about understanding how light and shadow hit and affect objects, mainly how light hits objects, bounces, and creates different shadows and different highlights. So starting with the most basic shape or form of a sphere, I have this one here, this is a drawing. So you'll see on the bottom, you have your scale, your value scale with 10 frames from light to dark. And then you have to think about how, when you're shading, all those different things happen when you're applying it to an actual form. So in this particular image, our light source is coming from the top right, and we know that because our highlight, why is this being stupid? Because our highlight is hitting right here, and then as we are moving around the form, we are moving away from the light and approaching this darkness over here that most people refer to as the deep shadow. To make the object look round, it has to slowly grade from light to dark or fade, and it's fading in not a striped shape but in a curve to reflect the curve of the sphere. In between the deep shadow and the highlight, we achieve a mid-tone. And then because the object is not floating in space, it is also casting a shadow onto the surface which it is sitting, which in this image we can assume is a table. So that is our cast shadow. Now this fifth element over here from highlight, mid-tone, deep shadow, and cast shadow that a lot of students forget about or don't know about is what we refer to as the reflected light. And it comes from the concept that the light is not just hitting the sphere, but the light is also hitting the table or whatever object it is that the sphere is surrounded by. And when the light hits the table, it bounces off the table and causes a very, very, very small highlight to happen on the bottom of the sphere down here, which we refer to as a reflected highlight. Now, chiaroscuro doesn't just happen on spheres, it happens on every object, and it also happens in color. So I'm just going to show y'all a couple of other examples. Here, this is an actual photographed object. So here, this object is kind of shinier, so you'll see that our highlight is much smaller. It's actually a little reflection. Then we have halftones, which can be referred to as the mid-tone. The core of the shadow, so you'll see there's a little bit of a different terminology. And here the reflected light is not a bright shiny highlight, but you can see how it actually is lighter at the bottom of the sphere and the reflected light than it is in what they're calling the core shadow or the regular shadow, and still the cast shadow here. All right, here's the same kind of concept broken down where you can see they kind of like circled or outlined the 5 different areas. So the reflected highlight doesn't always necessarily have to be white. It just needs to be lighter than the deep shadow. So in this case, highlight is 1, mid-tone 2, deep shadow 3, reflected highlight 4, cast shadow 5. I love this one because this one shows an example of a monochromatic and both kind of a black and white and a color option. So you can see how the light would look on 2 different surfaces, 2 different colors. And then we have an actual table here. This is, I stole this from Google, so I'm not quite sure who the artist is. But if you zoom in, you can still see the highlight there on the, and then right on the bottom left curve of this red sphere, you'll see the reflected highlight amongst the dark deep shadow, and then even down here in this white sphere, it's just this little tiny tidbit. Okay, and we can still see the implication as well of the cast shadow, although we don't get like a perfect round sphere shape always. It kind of depends on what you're looking at. These are some more drawings done in your sketchbook with colored pencil. I love these because you can see the different color scheme, and although they are quote monochromatic, meaning this is like an all red sphere, you can see how there are some complementary colors like green used with the red and even violet. You might not see them to the naked eye, but those greens and violets have been added to give dimension and depth. If you really look down at the bottom there in the cast shadow especially, you can probably see hints of the green showing through the red. Same thing here with orange and yellow with the violet, deepest in the shadows, because what happens is our complementary colors or our opposite colors are neutralizing each other. So it's going to take that green or that red or whatever color, and it's going to intensify it almost kind of into a brownish grayish color depending on how you apply the different textures, but still getting deep shadows and reflected highlights and seeing all 5 elements of chiaroscuro. think I have one more image. Yes. These are done with analogous color schemes. So thinking about your color wheel with all colors that are touching, going from green to yellow to orange, or from blue to green to yellow. And so actually no quote white or black is happening on these, but you can still see that the yellow in most of these instances on the top is forming the highlight color. So what would be considered your lightest color. But you don't always have to have necessarily white and black. Also, I'm sorry that my dog is coughing in the background. So when I'm talking about demonstrating chiaroscuro in your next drawing assignment, be thinking about how you can take these techniques, highlight, midtone, deep shadow, and cast shadow, and demonstrate them on a more complex object. Thanks, guys.